Welcome to the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast. Whether you are a seasoned professional or a first-time fundraiser, we have the advice you need to take your next step toward major gift mastery. I'm your host, Tom Dauber, President of Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. Well, good morning. This is Tom Dauber with the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast. I am so pleased to have my friend and colleague, Bernice Martin Lee, or as we like to call her, B, on the show today. B is the CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation. And it's just so wonderful to have you with us today, B.
Well, thanks, Tom. It's so good to be here with you.
Well, my goodness. So we had a great time working together in the past, and it's been so awesome to see your, if you don't mind me saying, meteoric rise in the nonprofit world as CEO there. I follow you on LinkedIn. You know, I see you on Facebook. You're at places. You're doing things. You're all over the country, maybe the world, even in the White House, meeting with all sorts of people. That's amazing, B. Congratulations.
Thank you so much, Tom. It has been an amazing journey with Epilepsy Foundation. I could not be prouder of the work of my team and what we're doing in the community.
I'm sure. Well, we're all proud, B. And you know, I don't have epilepsy, but, you know, my nephew is living with it. That's more of a recent thing that's been diagnosed. And then even my dog apparently is having seizures now. So all sorts of things.
Common, surprisingly. It's very common in dogs.
Yeah. Well, anyway, enough about all that. Tell us about yourself. When you're leading the charge in the treatment and cure of epilepsy. What do you do when you're not in professional mode?
Well, you know, Tom, from our relationship, you know, my first job is a wife and mother, right? I'm raising 3 amazing children. I'm all adults now. And, you know, married to my wonderful husband, Philip. And other than that, I'm still very active in activities around social services, particularly children.
That's fantastic. Now, tell me about your role as CEO. What's all involved and how did you get where you are today?
Sure. Well, it's an ironic story I'll start with how I got here. A good friend of mine, and you may know her name is Sabrina Horton. She was a colleague of ours at Ohio State University. Right. Her and I have become good friends, and she actually nominated me for this position.
Oh.
And I got a call from the recruiter, and I immediately felt a little outed because, as you know, I had not discussed my epilepsy openly, particularly with my colleagues and in the workplace, because of the stigma that typically follows someone living with epilepsy. And she initially reached out because she knew I had a keen interest in health equity. And I was a little nervous about the position when they initially reached out to me. I didn't know if I was ready to tell the world about my condition because of the stigma I have faced throughout my life living with epilepsy. I was diagnosed, I had my first seizure at 19, and I was diagnosed at 21 with epilepsy. And from that point on, I've had incidences in the workplace where I have faced discrimination and stigma. So over the course of my career, I just learned not to disclose. So when they initially reached out, I kind of hemmed and hawed about it. But she said something to me that was really important. Sabrina did. She said, you know, you have always championed health equity. This is how you can use your lived experience to move the needle for those in the community. And she was absolutely right. 40% of individuals living with epilepsy are from Brown and Black communities. And it is a very, very unknown statistic in our community, right? And there's such a lack of access to care. And she was absolutely right that this was somewhere where I could make a difference. So after several months of interviewing, I was offered the job last July, and I've been in my role just about a year.
That's wonderful. Well, it's great to be here celebrating 12 months on the job with you, B.
And wow. So in my role, I mean, you asked what my role entails. You know, we are an organization we are a national organization of also 26 affiliates across the country in 5 regions. And so my role entails making sure that we are spreading our mission far and wide, and also communicating with our community directly. And our programming includes education, advocacy, research, and connection. Connection is so important because 3.4 million people live with epilepsy in our country, 470,000 children. However, what we hear most from our community is that they feel isolated and alone. So, opportunities for the community to come together and be empowered is what we are trying to accomplish at the Epilepsy Foundation.
I see. Wow. Well, that's important work for sure. What else would you like to share with our audience today about the Epilepsy Foundation and its mission?
Yeah, so I'll start with our vision. This year, we took on the awesome responsibility of redefining the foundation and who we are and what we mean to our community and to others. So, our new vision statement really speaks to that isolation. And our vision statement is so that no one faces epilepsy alone. Right? That is the mission, that is the vision of the foundation. And our mission statement is just as I said, to improve the lives of individuals affected by epilepsy through education, advocacy, research, and connection. And the word affected is so important because that also extends to caregivers, family members, and colleagues that are helping individuals in the community who are living with epilepsy. So, again, the foundation supports not only the individual living with epilepsy, but also their entire support system.
Wow. Wow, that's excellent. Well, I can only imagine, not having been a CEO of a foundation, that the transitioning from being a major gift officer, even a chief development officer, you know, to CEO is a big one.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest differences in those roles? Were there any that were particularly challenging to you?
I really believe that being a major gift officer in nonprofit and in medical fundraising really helped me understand what was necessary for an organization to be successful in the fundraising space. And as you know, Tom, what's most important is that you have a clear mission and you have a clear case for support. So, what was challenging for me when I came into the organization was I didn't find those two things,
Ah,
right? And so, usually I'm on the other end. I was on the other end of just making sure that I was able to communicate that to donors. But in this role, I had to actually create it and define it.
wow.
And so that was how I spent my first year, is redefining the foundation's vision, mission, and our strategic plan, and building out a case for support so that our fundraisers could have a clear path forward in how and why we were fundraising to support individuals living with epilepsy.
I'll bet your fundraisers were very grateful for that work that you did.
They were. They were very grateful because prior, I mean, they are a fantastic team. And despite not having those tools, they were very successful. They met goal each year, but the goal was stagnant. They weren't able to grow. And as you know, as a fundraiser, it's so important to be able to talk about impact, right? But also to give people clear outcomes and deliverables regarding programming. And that was something that they were struggling with prior.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you were preaching to the choir here, B, because as I work with nonprofits, I'm always that's basically what I'm telling them, right?
Hmm.
Helping them figure out what in the world are we trying to do and how do we communicate that clearly. It's so crucial.
Yeah, we actually took it one step further than our strategic plan, and we just completed a branding workshop, and not branding in the sense of, logo, colors, things of that sort, but in the sense of what is our message? What are we trying to communicate to the public? And how are we doing that consistently? Right? And what is the organization's DNA? What is our DNA? And then allowing ourselves to message from that DNA, right? And the message that we landed on is that where empowered journeys begin. right? And so everything we talk about talks about the foundation through that lens. We are where, whether that be a physical location or virtual, empowered journeys begin, meaning where you can find information, education, where you can find tools to become an advocate in your own community. And we understand that the journey with epilepsy ebbs and flows, right? For instance, I have been seizure free since 2015. However, at any moment, I know I could have a seizure, right? Even reaching seizure freedom. And that is the journey, diagnosis to possibly seizure freedom, to living with epilepsy in a different way if it should return, right? And then also individuals who are unable to reach seizure freedom because we are the epilepsies, right? We are there. A third of our population is drug resistant. So their journey is different and it may lead to surgery, whether that be resection surgery and or device implementation. So we recognize the journeys for epilepsy are so different and varied, but they all should be empowered.
Tom Dauber here for Abundant Vision Philanthropic Consulting. Fundraising can be hard work, and it can be hard to mentally get into the place you need to be in order to see new opportunities. Everyone struggles with it. We are like the fish in the fishbowl who just can't see the water they're swimming in. That's when having outside expertise comes in handy. For 25 years, I've been helping nonprofits analyze their challenges, discover new ways forward, and develop clear plans that lead to greater fundraising revenues. Now I am available to help your organization develop the abundant vision it needs to inspire new levels of philanthropy at your nonprofit as well. Check out abundantvision.net to start
one of the
your
reasons we
journey
do this
toward greater
podcast
fundraising success
is
today.
so that
Now,
less
back to the
experienced
show.
fundraisers, and that includes CEOs of smaller nonprofits, people that don't have that background, can learn some things like they normally would working in a big shop, rubbing shoulders with other nonprofit
Right.
professionals. I'm curious, is there a piece of advice that you might share with, the CEO of a smaller nonprofit about going through this revisioning process, going through the case statement building sort of process that you did?
My number one advice would be to make sure you are talking with the community you are serving. As you mentioned, this year I spent 32 days on the road.
Wow.
Yes. But it was so key because I was not just talking to the leaders of our affiliates and the leaders of our chapters. I was talking to the families and individuals
Yeah.
and bringing that information back to my board of directors so that we had a clear picture of the individual we were serving and how best to serve them. Sometimes, as you know, Tom, with best intentions, we think we know what the needs of the community are,
Yeah.
but we don't ask the people who are actually living with the issue.
That's right.
That would be my number one advice, is make sure when you're going through that process that you are actually talking with the client and getting that feedback from them along the way. Every time, like when we were thinking about the vision statement, we focus grouped it, right? Does this resonate with you? Is this something that would bring you closer to the foundation? And we were really blessed that in most cases it was yes, but there were times where they were like, this word doesn't feel good to me, right? Or when we changed from, people were saying, seizure freedom should be the goal, and our community was saying, no, quality of life, because quality of life is different for every individual. And for example, one family said to me, whose son has a rare epilepsy, the days that he can read a story with his brother and smile is quality of life for us. He's never going to reach seizure freedom. He has hundreds of seizures a day. But those days where he's not so medicated that he can be a part of our family, that's quality of life. So again, my biggest advice is make sure you're talking to your community.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more with that. That's great advice. Now you've touched on this a little bit already, but I'll never forget the day when you came out on LinkedIn as an individual with epilepsy.
Mm-hmm.
As your former manager, I can tell you I had no clue at all. And I felt like what you did was such a brave thing, to share something so personal in that public space. Can you talk a little bit about the process that you went through in deciding to do that?
So again, I recognized in taking on this role, there was a need to be transparent about my lived experience because I recognized to be able to empower others, I had to share my story, right? I had to share my story to let others know that and I use the phrase a lot, to live without boundaries, right? Epilepsy can be a condition of subtraction. There are moments you can't drive,
Mhm.
you can't swim, you can't hold this job, you can't drink, you can't do this. There's several things there's a lot of can'ts living with epilepsy. And it was important in my role and what I've done over my career to help people understand, but there are a lot of cans, right? There are a lot of things that you can do as long as you prioritize your safety. Even now, my life has changed dramatically. I'm on the road a lot. Uh, my With my epilepsy, my sleep is very important, and hydration is very important. And I have to be very transparent. So to be honest with you, I had a call the other night with our board of professionals, which are our neurologists and epileptologists who support the organization. And I was not feeling well. And I know it was because I had started at 7 a.m. that morning. This call was at 5 p.m. I had not really left my desk because I was on call after call after call. So I hadn't eaten, I hadn't really had enough water, and I hadn't rested. And I had to be very transparent in that meeting and say, right now I'm experiencing symptoms. That was a hard conversation to have because I know there were times in my career where if I called in and said I wasn't going to make it, I was like, I'm just sick. But I may have experienced a seizure, right? Or, and how do you tell an employer, I am experiencing an aura, which means I may have a seizure? Because most people don't understand that word.
Yeah, yeah.
And what we find in our community, um, and me sharing my story, I've learned of others who absolutely have the same experience of you never want to seem unreliable,
Yeah.
right? You don't want to seem like that you're not up for the job. So sometimes we push ourselves beyond our limits. And I'm here to tell people that it's okay to take a break. It's okay to take care of yourself first, right? And that doesn't define your professionalism, right? Taking care of yourself does not define your professionalism. And for a long time, quite honestly, Tom, I didn't take that advice. Right? I didn't take that advice. I would push myself because I felt like having epilepsy meant that I could not be the professional that people wanted me to be or needed me to be in a lot of cases.
Wow. That's pretty heavy stuff there, B. Appreciate you sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So you just touched on this, so it's kind of a good segue. If you could go back and talk to your younger self all the way back in the early part of your major gift officer days, is there any advice you'd give to yourself to help you prepare to become the leader you are today?
Oh man, so much advice I would give myself. But I think the most important advice I would give myself is remember this is a marathon and not a sprint.
Yeah.
And sometimes your tenaciousness and the goal that has been set for you will push you to move relationships much faster than they're ready for.
Mm.
Right. And what I've learned over my career is that a good fundraiser lets the donor lead.
Hmm.
Right. And there were times, early in my career as a major gift fundraiser, I was so focused on my goal that I lost sight of the relationship.
Yeah. I think that's helpful. There's a individual that I'm getting to know fairly well, a little bit. We've had him on the podcast, and he's another consultant like me, but he's very accomplished. And he spends a lot of his time talking to like universities, flagship universities, those sorts of things. And that's really his message is don't lose the relationship. Let the donor lead, those sorts of things. And he and I've had a conversation about, because what he sees is people kind of wagging the dog with the metrics.
Mm-hmm.
That is making the metric, driving things to hit goals, those sorts of things, without prioritizing that relationship and honoring the donor. And he and I tend to give opposite advice. And I finally realized that it's not because I don't value the relationship, because I agree with almost everything he says, but we're working with different organizations. A lot of times I'm working with organizations that have never been intentional.
Yeah.
They've never been missional. They've never had metrics before. And so, but they're all relationship. They're all heart,
Like we say, fundraising is an art and science.
That's right.
Right? It's an art and science. And the science part are the metrics, are the moves management, right? Yeah. And the art is understanding how to move the relationship to meet those metrics.
Yeah.
I have just found that when that relationship is built in the right way, it's lasting. And that is a donor that will stay with you, and not only with you, but will stay with the organization and the mission, and will grow with the mission and the organization as well, right? They're the donor that is going to be there long term. I think, unfortunately, metrics sometimes allow us to, once we close that gift, it's like on to the next.
Yeah.
Right. Forgetting that individual is still important to foster that relationship.
That's all the time we have today. But be sure to tune in next week to hear the next part of this exciting conversation. Now, if you've enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a 5-star rating on your podcast provider. I'm your host, Tom Dauber. Thank you for joining me as we journey together towards major gift mastery on the Abundant Vision Fundraising Podcast.